Especially when you talk
Check,
about
check.
a
Good evening and welcome to the November 13th, 2019 Planning Board meeting for the Town of Raymond. The Planning Board will come to order. The board does have a quorum. We'll start with roll call.
Kyle Bancroft. Bruce Sanford. Greg Foster.
Robert O'Neill.
Ed Greenwich.
Mike D'Arcangelo.
This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that is being said and to look at all the exhibits that are presented. Please notify the chair if you are unable to see or hear. The board works from a published agenda and will be considering tonight's items in the following order. We have on the road connectivity, planner communications, followed by adjournment. In each instance, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the provisions of the applicable ordinances or state law. All persons speaking, including representatives of the applicant and members of the public, are asked to stand at the microphone, state their name, address, and affiliation with the application, either for, opposed, or neutral. All persons speaking shall address the chairman. Any conversation must be held in abeyance until after the board has formally adjourned. After the board votes on the merits of each application, it will prepare a written notice of decision. Because the notice of decision may substantially affect any appeals rights, and also as a matter of courtesy, the board asks that those attending the meeting with regard to a specific application not leave until the board has completed its discussion. Appeals from adverse decisions must be filed with the Superior Court or as otherwise provided by law within 45 days of this board's decision. Also, to be certain that you preserve your individual rights to file any such appeal, you must be certain that the board records evidence of your appearance this evening in opposition as the basis of your opposition. Right. So just a note on the minutes, the legal guys, town lawyer has given us approval to use the video
why am I getting an
as
echo?
the legal minutes for our meeting. That what we're going to then just look at is abbreviated, is what you had before you. Mary produced for some old ones. She's going to continue to roll these out, which we will vote on. Actually, just voting to ensure that the vote is accurate, and that's all. Did I miss anything as far as minutes go? Scott, you talked to him?
Yeah,
Okay, which ones should I be shutting off?
That the video is the official record.
Do we do that each?
Yeah, we do that anyway with
Yeah.
our,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
It's in the ordinance.
All right. So the first
The
thing is
toggle
the
automatic
approval minutes
mixing
for
for
July,
the
July
snippet.
11th, 2018 minutes.
Move to approve as written. Second.
Those
Send
are
to
in
inputs,
favor.
audio to master.
There's the three of you, Greg, Kyle, and Ed. Is that okay? All right, the rest of us abstains. We got three, so it passes. And then the minutes of the August 3rd, 2018 minutes.
August 8th.
August 8th, excuse me, 2018 minutes.
Move to accept the August 8th, 2018 minutes as written.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor? Abstains and passes. Okay. Get that out of the way. New business. We have the sketch plan review from Port Harbor Marine. Just before you go, just so the board, I don't think the board knows, right? So the
Yeah, you probably just.
yeah, so just for the board's information, Jim has to recuse himself from this one, so you'll be working without him to start with. And then has Will agreed to step in, Mary?
Yes, but he won't be here tonight. not
Right,
for
no, that's
Smith
fine.
Grant. Yeah,
But he's.
yes,
but,
he's on board.
Okay, Will's on board to handle the rest of the work. All right, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Rob McSorley, and I work with Sebago Technics, and I'm here representing the applicant, Par Harbor Marine. They own the Jordan Bay Marine down off 302, and they're looking at expanding their number of slips on the site. And in order to do that, we thought we'd come before you and get some input for you, which course that we need to go down. I provided for you a sketch plan. It's basically the overall configuration of the site as it exists today. You can see up on the map right there, you have the two front buildings, one being the commercial building with maintenance and storage below, the big building behind it, which is boat storage, a couple ancillary buildings. The darker gray area is the paved area that exists on site. We came before you, I believe, in 2014 and reconfigured that area. There's a retaining wall or segmental retaining wall there that kind of separates grade. The front part of that is product display boats and whatnot. The bottom part is some more product display and storage and employee parking area, and then you have some front parking in the front of the building for those people who are coming for the retail portion. Most of the operation though, or visits to that, actually come from people who are coming to the marina itself. It's not really a destination commercial facility like other places in town. The back part of the site there is gravel that goes back down adjacent to the existing 67 slips that are on the site there. The ones closer to the boat storage building are more of our boat and waiting spaces. People who are coming for the day and want to drop their boats that are in storage in. We put those in and right there, and when they come back, we take them out of the water and put them back in storage. We have the slips that go all along the cove there and out around the point. What we're proposing to do, we have 10 slips there at the end, far end. The dock's colored a lighter brown and a darker brown out towards the deeper portion of Sebago Lake. We're hoping to take those 10 spaces out there and construct some new primary dock space and have slips off that dock. Basically, we would be removing 10 slips, adding 69 for a net of 59 more slips. Currently, we have 67 total. We hope that in the end we'll have about 116 in total once we do this build out. Currently, there are no concrete parking ordinances or parking in your ordinance. The way it typically is worded is that all uses that you have on site, you have to apply the parking for each separate use and then add those up to get their parking total for the site. It's kind of unusual because on a marina like this, it's more of a total business. But for the sake of parking, we looked up typical marina type parking for either whether you have slips or whether you have boats in storage, and then we use the numbers that you have in your ordinance relative to number of employees in retail space. By the plan, if you put that independently, you're looking at about 160 spaces. We have about 130 marked out on the site between the retail, the current employee spaces, and what we did was on that the rock area, we have assumed that everything there would be 10-foot wide parking, to be conservative. We're not gonna have the stripe lines evidently on the rock and whatnot, so be a
Where
little,
are you, I'm sorry, where are you talking right now?
I'm gonna walk.
Yeah, that would,
Okay.
you,
Actually, I got my pointer. You want a pointer?
oh, look at that.
I forgot my pointer. Bottom one?
Yep.
Right there, right there. This right here is all gravel area.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done there to portion out what parking could be on there is we use the typical parking aisle dimension, 24 feet down through there, an 18 wide deep space. But for the width of it, we assumed all those cars that would be parked up there that we have in the summer take up a 10-foot space versus a 9-foot space, which is in your ordinance, just to be a little more conservative on it. So with that layout, we currently have the ability to park about 130 vehicles on the site. Feel that that should be sufficient for our uses based upon the overall marina use for the property, but I wanted to get that parking calculation out there so that we'd have a little conversation on it. We have reached out to DEP. There's certainly, we have to come through the town because of the shoreline ordinance. We're not really doing any shoreline work. We're actually doing everything waterside. That will require a Natural Resources Protection Act permit from the DEP. We've also reached out to the Army Corps of Engineers preliminarily and going back and forth and trying to figure out what it is we need to do with them relative to the permitting for the expansion. What we know today, what we believe today is the depth of the water in that area is such that it will not fall under submerged lands. So we do not have to apply for a submerged land lease because of the difference between the natural water elevation and the controlled water elevation of Lake Sebago, or Sebago Lake. I think I give you quite a bit of information there and be more than happy to have a dialogue with you so that we can see how we move forward.
Okay.
Can I ask, so before we add anything, any more boat slips, I think you said you have 130 parking spots?
What I did was I just kind of laid out what we feel that we can fit on the site
Gotcha.
right now.
So how many parking spots did we have when before we made any changes with number of boat slips? I'm just wondering if the number of parking spots you've had have seemed to be adequate, and if they have, the percent of increased boat slips, are you sort of increasing your parking by that percent?
There has been no parking calculation or real parking study done to the site. It's existed for quite a while in its current state and whatnot. So relative to the use of the parking, we do have some flexibility for cars out there. They pretty much randomly park when they come. That's why when we figured out what the parking would be, we didn't assume it'd be a 9-foot space. We don't have a desire to go down and pave that. By DEP rules, we could pave over rock and still be considered impervious, but it's not the, what the typical marina is right now. So what we just did was we elaborated and took what we have for existing area and tried to figure out what it would park.
And it seems like that'll be enough.
We, based upon some of the stuff relative, once again, not a lot of people have marina parking in their ordinance, not even in Maine. So we went out there, and that's why I got the 0.6, varies from 0.45 to 0.65, depending upon literature relative to slips. And then, .2 for your stored boats. There's actually been a study that they did on July 4th at a particular one where it fell just about to .6 for July 4th weekend for the number of slips and whatnot. And in that case, in that parking, they didn't separate out the different uses. And we kind of did that to be a little bit conservative. Like on July 4th, we're not going to have too many people, not too many employees working, and we're not going to have too many people showing up for buying stuff on July 4th, I believe. So we were just trying to show what the maximum is we could get on there. Right now, we have not experienced any issues relative to parking with the number of slips that we have.
Okay, thanks.
So in the end, the plan will have 116 slips with 130 parking spaces. Is that pretty much what,
Correct. 116 slips is about what we'll have, yeah.
130 parking spaces?
With about the ability to park about 130 cars on it.
And there's no real change to the parking
No,
with the addition of the slips?
correct.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, this is a little bit of a quibble. I'm not coming up with 130 total slips when I just add the numbers that are listed. I'm coming up with 124, but I'm wondering if maybe the 8 valet boat slips that are abutting the existing boat storage building, if that note should say 10 instead of 8. I'm missing 6 slips in here. I can't find
I
them.
apologize.
Which
I
would
believe I
decrease your parking by
counted them and double counted them, but I think we know that we have 67 permanent slips because that's what we lease. In the,
I think he said 130 slips.
Yeah.
it's 116. It'll be 116 in the end. We have 67 right now.
Right,
Parking
but you have 130 parking spaces now.
Cor-
And you will not-
Space,
there'll be no
space for
increase.
parking 130. Yeah,
And there'll be no increase to that number.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't mean
Right.
park, I mean boat slips.
Apologize, but
I'm just adding up the numbers. You're adding 59 net after the 10 you're taking out, and then you've got 10 next to them is 69, and 32 next to that's 101, and then 15 moorings, 116, and 8 valets, 124.
We don't count the valet slips in those 67. We're counting the 67 as leased spaces.
Rob, we got to keep you on the mic.
I'm just going by
Oh,
your
you're all
chart
set.
that
Oh,
says
perfect.
130.
Excellent.
I mean, it's a quibble at this point, because this is just a sketch review, but I know there's a discrepancy between what I can add up for slips on the plan versus what's listed on the chart.
The whole thing is that those are the boats that come out of this storage in the building and whatnot. And we account for parking that, and that's the .2 per stored boat that they typically think is what your equivalent parking should be if you're having boat storage on your site. And then .6 parking spaces per lease slips, and that's what that is. The lease slips are these slips right here. These are our pull the boat off the shelf and put it in the water, and somebody comes and
But you're using the 71 existing slips to calculate your parking, but according to the count here, especially if you're omitting the 8 valet boat slips, you've got considerably less than 71 existing slips. You've got 10 plus 32 is 42, and 15 mooring is only 57.
Okay, we have
if you're
10.
omitting the 8 valets.
10 spaces here, 10 spaces here, that's 20. And then we have 15 there, that's 35. 35 and 32 is 67.
Okay, explain that to me again.
Yeah.
It says existing 10 boat slips.
Yeah.
Next to the addition on the end, which is 59 net after you take out the 10 that you're removing. So you got 10 there.
10 there.
You got 32 next to it is 42, and then 15 mooring is
Yeah.
57.
Off the end here, there are 10 more.
But you're losing those 10 on the end by the additions.
Correct. So We're adding 69, so we're adding a net 59.
You're adding 59,
Net, yeah.
right, 59 net, and then you're showing 57 more excluding the valets existing. I'm just adding up what you're listing on your drawing here.
Okay, I'm losing you, so 10, 10, and 15.
Well, yeah, 10 and 32 is 42, and 15 is 57.
Bruce, are you counting where it says existing 10 boat slips?
But those are going
Each
away
space
because you're adding,
But each
Okay.
has two slips in it, each space has two
Yeah.
slips.
Yeah.
What we're saying, we have
Is that throwing you
67
There's
currently.
actually 20 where,
Yeah,
67 currently,
67 current, you're taking away 10, so now, yeah, you have 57,
yeah.
right?
And
And then you're adding 56.
you're adding 69.
69.
How? You have 14 down each row, and you've got 4 rows, that looks like 56. What am I missing here?
We may be short or extra one.
You may,
But,
I mean, in order to meet your count, it looks to me like you have to extend the addition out
Yeah,
several more slips on each side
yeah.
to equal what you're showing.
I have a plan that's done up, it's a sketch of this, and it numbers from 1 to 1 to,
116?
I don't
Only
remember
116.
either.
Yeah, 116.
So, our hope is to.
Well, just double check it because
Yeah.
I work in construction numbers for a living, and
Okay.
it looks to me like you've got 56 that you're adding on here.
Yeah.
4 rows of 14. That's the dark at the end.
Yeah,
So that's 56, and then you add the 57 that you have existing net left over after you lose 10. 56 and 57 is like 113.
the way they're configured here, one boat is kind of going this way versus this way. I think it does work out in the end, but I'll double check.
Just double check it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then if I could just add, if there's a plan that shows, like, that you mentioned that has numbers, maybe that would really be helpful.
I don't have that with me. It's
Oh,
a-
no, but I
it's a-
mean, in.
Yeah,
in the
we can,
future.
we'll, this is just for sketch plan purposes, but we would, on our final submittal, we'll probably have all those slips numbered,
Great.
so.
Okay, so we, as far as going out the slips into the water, I don't believe we have any ordinance to deal with that at all.
No, we,
So-
yeah, we had talked about that
Right.
with DEPU with what would be needed for that, and basically they're still staying under anything that would be required other than the planning board approval.
Okay.
So there's no state or town limit in terms of how far out?
No, our ordinances just dictates the width of the dock, not the length of it. It basically results back to interfering with the navigation of the right-of-way, which is enforced by the game wardens. They're the enforcement part of that.
And once again, if we were to go out, so we go past the magic depth, then we get into the part where we have to do a submerged land lease. But what we've been told by the state is the depth of the water in the area that we propose to extend the docks does not exceed the depth. Therefore, we do not need to get a submerged land lease.
Great, thanks.
Jim, I need to ask a history question, which is not directly related, well, kind of directly. But when we did the, when we did the disc golf course, was that overflow parking part of the marina parking? Was there some arrangement there?
No,
Was that, that was already discussed, okay,
there was no discussion with the marina for that. no.
okay. There was some overflow
That
parking.
was for, the golf was gonna use the hydroponics for overflow.
Hydroponics, that's right, okay, thanks. Did you, I'm sure you got the fire department's memo?
We did, we had a little conversation just before the meeting started. We haven't looked at it in depth, but we realized the NFPA codes and whatnot. I think there's gonna need to be further discussion of how we meet things and whatnot, so. yeah.
Okay.
I do have one more question.
Yes, sir.
the boat storage building that's closest to the 8 valet boat slips, am I correct in that that is the ramp that people back their boats down into the water just to the left on the plan view of the 8 valet slips?
That's where you load your boats, right?
We do, no,
And not, people do not load.
the ramp is at the far end.
Why don't you come up and show us that, so we, yeah, Chuck, for understand what you're saying when you're
This
sitting
is
back
where
there.
they bring the boats in.
That
come
looks
on
like the
building.
ramp right there, that's
Yeah.
correct.
There's,
No, this is where we load them in with a forklift. Forklift only, there's no ramp here. There's a ramp down here that's used by us.
Okay.
Occasionally someone may, it's not like, there's no ramp passes or anything like that anymore.
It's not a public ramp.
It's not a public
It's strictly
ramp.
for your.
When you really can't even pay. to
What
use
my
it.
concern is that there's adequate circling area for trucks
Trailers.
towing boats, you know, to do what they need to do to back down the ramp and turn around and everything, if there's adequate area. I think we're gonna need to see those calculations and some circles and whatnot, the turning radius is shown on the drawings, you know, before you wrap it up. That would be my
Don't-
feeling.
Don't you launch all your boats with a forklift, or most of them?
Most of them are.
And there's no public boat launch there,
There's
it's
no
just,
public boat launch.
the
Anything
company
that's
business.
launched.
Oh, so people aren't driving their boats down there?
No.
We may launch a boat at the ramp.
Oh, okay,
But
all right,
It's
all
not
right.
open to
Okay.
The
Well,
public
that-
is.
That changes my comment then.
good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, what else would you like to hear from us?
We know there's some concerns that we gotta meet for the
The
fire
fire
department and
department.
discuss with them. Is there anything from a code enforcement or the planning board sees anything specific that they wanna draw our attention to?
Having some rather extensive experience with marinas, I can tell you there's never enough parking. So I'm wondering where, if in fact we go with the 130 spaces are in fact the end deal, where does overflow parking go?
Okay.
And I'm not saying 130 spaces, I mean, I'm not saying it has to be 135 or 100 or 140. I'm just wondering if in fact it proves to be inadequate, where would that overflows parking go to?
Could you provide the rationale that you used to determine, you know, the number of spaces you feel are necessary for the marina with the additional slips?
Okay.
With your submittal, just, I know you rattled off a few
Yeah.
factors, you know, per slip and ranges of factors.
Yeah, what I did was I did some research on marine sites, specifically to marine parking, looked at several marine studies. I had noted one that somebody had done a study during July 4th and whatnot. And they usually look at it based upon the number of slips that you have at a marina facility. They don't typically look at other side uses or whatnot. It's the boats that are the driver for the parking calc. And they vary for slips between a 0.45 and up to a 0.65. What I saw, the typical number that they said to use was 0.6 per slip. 0.6 per slip. And then for your boats that are stored boats where people call ahead and say, okay, I'm taking the boat out today, and he's gonna go get the forklift and take it out of the building and put it in the water, you should count at least 0.2 spaces per each one of those. On top of that, although typically marinas, when they look at parking like a specific use, they don't count, you know, retail here and employees here. But I added in additional spaces based upon your code on what it calls out for employees and what it calls out for retail. So that's how I came up with the 160 number. And then the 130 was what we have on site, existing employee, retail, and then what we believe we can fit in there based upon trying to be conservative on who's gonna park there.
Okay.
And if I
Could-
paved
could
it
you
all,
just-
I could probably put stripes and put 9-foot spaces, but
could you
I don't
just
think we wanna
include that
pave it.
with your proposal, that's all I was asking. If you
What's
could
that?
just include your calculations.
Oh, yeah.
As backup for your,
yeah,
with your.
it's actually on the plans up in the corner. So, but,
Guys are too old. Get to
Change in impervious space, all this is now gravel, that's parking?
yeah, and we're not changing any impervious areas.
So do we need phosphorus calculations again? And if we do, they're never gonna pass.
Well, if it's existing,
It's existing,
yeah, I don't think it's always something new that would require phosphorus, not something that's already been there. At least that's what I would,
that would make sense, because we're not changing any of the
No.
parking, it's all parking
Yeah.
that's already there.
mhm.
Typically on the phosphorus for the way the state calculates it, everything that's existing is existing, and then they looked at what the
Additional.
loading can go for the remaining developed areas, and then they're restricted.
So stormwater runoff, phosphorus calculations are not going to be required, or part of the part of the application?
I don't believe so, no.
Because everything is being changed, is on the water.
But it's just exchanging,
No, I mean, everything they're all slips, it's not,
yeah,
we're not changing any,
anything, yeah.
yeah, makes sense.
Nothing's happening on the land.
What?
Nothing's happening on the land.
Right.
Well, if you look at what the fire department's proposing too, it looks like there could be some changes there. I mean, if you're looking at what I'm looking at here, just the turnaround for an apparatus, 40-foot gate cab's not happening down there. So, I think it's reasonable to think that we're gonna have some alterations, so I think that'll probably be included in the final proposal. I mean, just looking
Right.
at the laundry list there, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be addressed, and a lot of it in the past hasn't really been negotiable, so.
I think we need to discuss a little bit more with the fire department on that end. Typically you would like to have a radius turnaround, but I think in this instance, the restriction would be a T turnaround, and I think we could fit it within the existing confines.
Okay. So I guess as long as there are no changes, we're
Yeah.
okay with, the board's okay with
Yeah.
Rogers?
Yep.
And if there are, then we'll address those.
And we have to address those.
Yep. What else?
And I'll double check them out.
What zone is this in?
Two, commercial and shoreline.
Is it in the commercial?
Front part is,
I'm sorry?
the front part is
Is commercial.
commercial.
I guess what my concern, I haven't looked through the manual, for that. Are there any prohibitions against doing mechanical work on a boat outside in the open where it's stored as opposed to being, required to do it inside the building in the maintenance area?
I did not research that. I assume that we're gonna not do any more maintenance than what we currently do, which is in the building, right?
We do some maintenance outside.
And that's just my concern is, changing the oil for an engine or something out in the open out there and spilling 5 quarts of oil. And obviously that's gonna be a runoff and a,
Well, that would be
Pollution
typically
hazard.
pulled, wouldn't it? They change,
Wouldn't be doing it in the water.
I would,
It would either be in a building or right outside the overhead door, where you're doing, right? But still, as he points out, I think this
They
is
do have
safe
a
conditions.
permit with
Yeah.
DEP relative to their use,
Yeah.
which they have to manage stuff like that. And maybe we need to take a look at that management plan to make sure that it's adequate. But they have a permit that covers the site right now because of the commercial industrial use.
Okay.
If I can, sorry to beat
Sure.
a dead horse here, but this being on 302, obviously is really busy. I think one of us brought up the question of overflow overflow parking. And I know there's a paved area across on the other side of 302 that often stores boats. Would that be possible for overflow parking?
We would have to look at that. Right now, that's only boat storage over there. Yeah,
Oh, but could it be used?
Yeah. I
could be
mean,
used,
could it be
possibly, yeah.
used?
We'll look at it.
People crossing the street.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that would be the other issue. I mean, there is a stoplight there, but, I mean, it's a ways off, but
Yeah.
as far as slowing down the traffic somewhat, but.
Not to make it right.
Mhm.
That's a good idea, and but it would then, I think, require some more
Yeah, right.
engineering to get that road a little bit
Safer.
safer, yeah, yeah. So just a little bit, Robin, to what Kyle alluded to is, when you, in your discussions with Wayne, the board very rarely overrules the fire department.
Yep.
So as you're going through that, if you just kind of keep that in mind, it might save a meeting.
We will work out our things with fire department before we
Okay,
go
all
on back.
right.
So we're on the same page.
Perfect. Unless the board has any questions? Wayne, do you need to say anything? Do you,
No,
you just here for questions?
I think my memo covers it.
Yep.
And meeting with them, before we come back.
Okay. Okay, Rob,
Thank you so much.
thanks.
I know where he resides, so I can get him back.
Usually they steal mine at the office. I forgot to bring mine today. Thank you very much again.
All right, to the ordinance workshop.
So in case you gentlemen.
Excuse me, could you place the microphone up on the podium?
Yes, I can.
So many powerful laws.
Go.
Okay. For those that may not have copies, I do have some additional copies of the information that I emailed to you. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. The portion that we wanted to look at, as a reminder to everybody, was back a while ago, we were looking at ways to provide connectivity, and we looked, and what we came up with was, unless the interior roads and future connectivity were to be publicly owned, it would be difficult to get abutting owners to join and to continue the loop or connectivity of the roads. So we looked at ways to bolster our ordinances, to promote that. And primarily, I know, Bob, you went to the Board of Selectmen to see about the idea of acceptance of roads
Right.
for public, because that was gonna be a kind of a carrot to developers. If you go with a cluster subdivision, you know, there'll be support for making that a public road. In doing so, we looked at two sections of the ordinance which you have before you tonight that we've just kind of marked up. One being the street ordinance, which is more for the quality of the road being built. But I'll start with Article 13, which ironically is open space subdivisions, but is in the land use ordinance, not in the subdivision ordinance. So it's just the way, I didn't do this, it was before me.
Yep.
And we looked at where we could add some language in there to promote the use of connectivity. I went right in the beginning, in the introduction into the policy, added a few lines there, and then we also went into purposes, and we added a section in there. Under the purposes, it was provide considerate design for public roads acceptance and striving for connectivity to adjoining developable land parcels for the purpose of vehicle and pedestrian access loops or interconnected road systems in efforts to improve traffic and emergency access safety, reduce environmental impacts, and promote interconnection of neighborhoods. And then if you continue on, I think there's one more section there, maybe not.
Yeah, there is. You've got one more.
Why am I not finding it? Okay, under 4 space standards, when we talk about the actual road design, talk about adequate road curvature design, access and turnaround termini, to and from all parcels for fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and other emergency vehicles, meets minimal safe turning radius over all internal access streets, ways, or driveways. Road shall consider extension of right-of-ways to adjoining lands where development is possible in the future, and the planning board will promote the offering of such open space subdivision streets and rights-of-way for public acceptance. You know, Bob and I had this conversation about how do we word this. Obviously, the planning board doesn't have the authority to accept streets. That has to go to the Board of Selectmen. But we thought that if we had some language in there that basically set up that, you know, the board's mission is to guide as this moves along for public acceptance. Obviously, that's a policy issue that's bigger than the planning board and is with the Board of Selectmen. However, when we did look at that, and we had conversation with the Public Works Director, you know, we know that some of our subdivision requirements are a little outdated, and one of them is the road section itself. That's kind of where we got into the next piece, which is under the street ordinance, where we looked at basically the thickness of pavement. It was a little bit inadequate, so we beefed that up to be a little bit thicker, especially if we're going to be accepting these for public roads. We want a well-built road. We don't want anything marginal. So again, we bolstered that thickness up. And the other thing that I did was on shoulders for certain streets. And this one may be a little bit outside of my purview, but I kind of, if we're going to have road connectivity, and we're not going to have sidewalks, we do have to kind of think about bikes and pedestrian connectivity. More towns seem to be going to the shift of doing a paved shoulder for those types of activities to give a little more width in the development so that people can walk on the edge of the road without walking off the edge of the pavement.
Right.
Or for bikes to at least have a lane to ride your bike on where you're not in the actual travel lane. And typically that's done, you might put a white line in or something like that. It's not perfect, it's easier to maintain, and in most neighborhoods with the traffic numbers are low, they probably work very well. Once you get into curbs and sidewalks, you change the whole drainage characteristics and maintenance program, which adds probably some substantial nuisance to the town, you know, clearing sidewalks and the drainage aspect of it, and adds quite a bit of cost to the development. So that was just another aspect we added in looking at this whole grand scheme of things. So I'll leave it at that. We can have a discussion. There is another point of emphasis I'd like to get into afterwards, a little bit different, but in looking at this, it's something that I found.
Okay. Jim, your addition to the road standards,
Yes.
when you're talking about the right-of-way, what, is that going to change the net residential calculations?
No.
So there'll be no
No,
impact?
no change to the net density,
Okay.
net residential calculations. That is all within the confines of what we define as the right-of-way.
Okay.
It's just the travel portion itself. I did add another section in there which gets back to the connectivity, which I forgot to mention to you guys. There may be circumstances where road connectivity just by natural land features or unique land configurations doesn't work. The board, in this case I put in here, would have the ability to waive that connection requirement.
Right.
In other words, if they build out and they build into this, they come up to this bog, you know, and it's a 40-acre bog and it makes no sense to to build a road into it, you know, we can just discontinue the idea of a public connectivity. You know? And this would apply, the way we've worked this out right now, this would apply to cluster subdivisions.
Yep.
Now, the road standards could apply to all throughout.
But the road standards, I think the changes are really not just specific
The
for.
biggest one would be the idea of a pedestrian shoulder
Shoulder.
width.
But that's not going to
No,
just
it's
be
not
for
for
cluster division, right?
No,
That would be for all
it'd
of,
be all for all
Right.
subdivisions, yeah.
And
And I
that's-
don't see that as a huge issue one way, it's just added pavement. But I do think it adds some value for pedestrians and
Yes.
for bikes.
yep, that makes sense. Okay.
And, so I'll take any questions or any comments, or, you know, we'll.
I got two things. One is a language suggestion on the second page of Article 13. under new paragraph K, it says provide considerate design for public roads acceptance. The word considerate in there just sounds kind of fuzzy to me.
Okay.
And I'm suggesting maybe that we should say provide designs that facilitate public road acceptance.
Yep.
Instead of the word considerate.
No, I like that, thank you.
And then my other question is under the street ordinance on page 9, where it says down at the bottom, dead-end streets, the board shall require the reservation of a 50-foot easement in line with the street to provide continuation, you know, where it's a future subdivision is possible. How is that going to work in a land transfer situation where a guy's splitting his lot, he's got 20 acres, he's going to sell 10 acres to Joe, and there's going to be this title transfer, you know, when you buy the land. Is it our purview, or are we involved at all in this 50-foot easement somehow being granted as a condition of the title transfer? Because the guy who buys the 10 acres, if he doesn't know there's a 50-foot easement required and he buys it and there's nothing is said, and then he finds out later on after he's already bought the parcel that there's this easement required, that for some people that could be a problem logistically, or, you know, fundamentally, or however you want to look at it. What's our responsibility there, and is that something that could be,
I think in the case of subdivisions, when we have a dead-end street, all we're looking for in this case is an extension of the right-of-way or an easement, whatever you want to call it, to the adjoining property. And that would be, in this case, it would be, under the cluster provisions, it would be a town easement, basically, for the use of the town.
Right, and I can't see it being an
Burden.
acreage problem.
No,
It would be within the subdivision.
right.
so when he applies
Plans.
for the subdivision,
Yeah.
then
Right.
it's going to become an issue.
Right.
And if he doesn't want to grant it, he doesn't get the subdivision.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, if it's feasible.
Right.
And he doesn't want
And
to.
we pretty much promote that now.
Mhm.
It's on a private sector basis. And that wouldn't change in this case. I mean, if the person decides they want to have a private road, we still would ask for that extension to the adjoining property. It's just that going into the future, we kind of know the feasibility of that happening is probably pretty slim unless the same developer buys the piece parcel in the rear.
Yep.
If it's two different developments, the chances are that happening and them getting along and sharing a private road, it's probably 50-50 at
And
best.
it's kind of the same thing, that if he wants to apply for the subdivision, it's really up to the developer whether he wants to build the private road to a public standard for future acceptance, or risk having to rip it all up and redo it to extend it, you know,
Yeah,
through the right of way.
And I think if you look at the road standards, yeah, to your point, private road are typically, don't have the requirement, I don't believe, of being paved. So once you get to that paved road, you're into a minor street standard, which is what the town would accept.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have a limitation on how many lots you can do on a private road too, so. And I think the interesting thing is we've got a lot of older subdivisions which will, for all intents and purposes, were designed to be private. They're built to a public standard, but they've remained private. They're paved,
Right.
they meet all the public road
There's a lot of
standards.
those.
Yeah, so that's one thing.
Kyle,
Yes,
what are you thinking down there?
I'm gonna always side with the side of the contractor.
Yeah, I know.
And anytime we can put less restrictions on them and then, you know, be proactive, I'm all about being proactive, but the core of the issue hasn't been very clear to me, other than we wanna bring up our standards. So, I mean, it's all here. I think it's relatively fair. I think that you left the private street, the backlot driveway out of these revisions. I think where you're keeping it to a bigger type area, bigger size project.
Right.
It's reasonable, but
Okay.
reasonable as far as that's where I'll go.
I'll
with
take
it.
reasonable, that's fine.
Well, and
think it's
if
unreasonable.
I can go there, I think when you get to the cluster, you get into a
Well, I
number.
know, wait, I don't ask you.
When you get to the cluster development, you're into a number of lots where you're gonna have to pave the street no matter what. You've gone
Yeah.
over that private kind of street standard, but you're still a private road, but you're into the paved section now. So I think what I'm thinking was, if you're into the paved section, we should be endorsing those to be public roads, which is a benefit for the contractor and the development, because now they don't have to deal with the burden of maintenance on that further down the line. And for marketing, everybody wants to be on a public road versus a private road. Everybody knows at some point there's a burden on a private road. And the idea is, if we want to promote connectivity in further development and kind of condense this, rather than having dead end, dead end, dead end, dead end, and wasted land, having it in a public holding is the way to do that, because when they're in private holdings, two developments don't necessarily get along, and, so I think that was kind of our big picture. To your point, we haven't seen that kind of development happen.
Right.
We're just trying to be proactive in an economy where things are still growing. It's going to come this way eventually.
Just to synopsize, so I'm understanding this right then, we're really talking about is the difference between an 18-foot wide private street and a 20-foot wide minor street.
Right.
And the difference between 20-inch base gravel on a private road and 18-inch base gravel on a minor street.
And pavement.
Yeah, correct, yeah, so it's,
Pavement's probably the biggest change.
Kyle's point is well taken. It's, if you've got a 500-foot long road, that's gonna be a nice chunk of change.
Right.
But the developer has to make that decision as to whether he's going to build it in or go back in and rip it out later.
And it becomes a marketing thing for them, whether
Sure.
if you have a paved road, a public paved road, the marketing's much easier than if you have a private gravel road.
And that would probably mean less cost for the homeowners association and maintenance fees
Correct.
and whatnot.
Right, in the long term,
Because
it's
they've
better
got
for
a beefier
in the long
structure
term,
to
it's
begin
probably
with.
better for everybody.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So maybe there's an offset there.
And I think that's what we tried to come up with is, not just to put the burden on the developer, but to give them something back, to your point, Kyle, that's beneficial for them and the development in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at it on the small scale, 4 to 10, where your typical subdivision that we see in the town. I just didn't want to see any more burden placed on,
And I don't-
smaller size projects in the scale of what we're
And
looking
that
at
may
here.
be something we want to look at as far as cluster, because I think cluster only qualifies once you go over 5 lots. I think that's how it's defined in our cluster ordinance. Once you go over 5 lots, you're supposed to be providing the board with both a conventional and a cluster development plan. And there's acreage involved in that too. And maybe we can go back and look at that, maybe we want to refine it, maybe it's 10, maybe 10 lots is the magic. Under 10, you're still under the conventional. Once you go over 10, it all depends on the size and the tract of the land. There's so many variables that can go into that, but maybe we can push people in a direction we want them to go.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything in here that
Prohibits or.
yeah, exactly, that prohibits the board from making the rational decision. It's not shalls, it's waivable. If it doesn't apply, just like everything else that doesn't apply.
Right.
We don't do it.
If you don't mind, the one thing that I did find in this when I was going through this whole process was our definition of net residential density. It's not clear. Under the cluster ordinance, we have one kind of formula, which I get is kind of almost like a bonus density. When you go into cluster, you get a bolster of 20%
Right.
of your lots. So that's another carrot going to cluster. But when you look at the regular subdivision, you got to go in 34 pages before you find out you have to apply net residential calculations to the overall development of a subdivision. To me, that should be more upfront, so when people look at the subdivision ordinance, they know right off the bat, it's not a gross area thing. You gotta do this net residential calculation to figure out your number of qualifying lots. And that probably should be right up front in the criteria, right in the very beginning of the subdivision ordinance.
That, I don't think we need it. I mean, we can do that. We don't need it. We're not changing anything, so we
We're not
can-
changing it, it's a change in the ordinance, all, but I'm just saying I just think it's much clearer that way, because when somebody's looking at this and they go through the clusters subdivision ordinance, they see one way to compute it. When you go through subdivision, like I said, you gotta go almost 3/4 of the way through the subdivision ordinance before you find that, oh yeah, net residential does apply to this.
No, what I was saying is that a reordering is not gonna require us to go to a town meeting to get reordered. I think we can do that.
I think the only thing would be is if, it's not about reordering, I think it's just about making that, making a statement in the very beginning of the subdivision ordinance where you have your review criteria. I think that net density should be part of the review criteria in the statement
So
for
then
that.
we probably would.
Yeah,
Then we'd
but
have to be a
I mean, you're gonna be into it regardless. Because I think we've got some other things in the, that we may
okay.
be into that ordinance anyway.
All
that,
right.
You know, so. And I do have another, if there's no other comments on this, you know, we can discuss where we wanna go with this afterwards. But I do have, what did I do with it? I lost it again.
Well, before we do that, let's take a look at the road standards. Is everybody okay? Have they had, you had a chance to look through that? I think most, these things Jim has worked out with Nate. It's just to bring us more in line with really what,
Yeah, if we're gonna have a minor road, you know, and actually, when I talked to Nate, I mean, all the pavement is really thin by today's standards. I mean, when this was done, we had a different specification for pavement. And today, we've got more rock than asphalt in the mixes. So the thicknesses are thicker, basically. And that's all I changed.
okay.
And that and the shoulder,
And the shoulder.
And the shoulder. Which, again, if we're gonna start promoting pedestrian uses and connectivity, then either we should be either providing a sidewalk or some means, we don't want people walking in the middle of the street.
Right.
And that's just an easy thing, because the town can plow a shoulder as easy as they can plow the regular road. Sidewalks get into another piece of equipment and probably will never get done.
More money and effort.
Yeah,
The shoulder thing kind of solves it. I mean, I've been in commercial campuses where that's the deal.
Yeah.
Where, you know, we stripe it, and we can plow it right off, keep
Correct.
people out of the road.
Right.
I think that's a reasonable request.
Okay,
And, you know-
so the road standard's okay? That we can,
There was one item in the road standards that I noticed, it's either confusing or redundant. Under where we just were, where you showed the street construction standards and the pavement depths were changed. Below that, in bases and pavements, letter B, number 1, it says, it gives a gradation requirements for the material that passes a 4-inch square sieve. And then on the next page, it gives another set of gradation requirements for material that passes a 3-inch sieve. And it seems to apply to the same thing. It's
Yeah.
like a double.
Yeah, I'll take a
entry.
look at that. That's a,
We probably should just have one. I think what they left out was the crushed aggregate base. Isn't that in there?
yeah, it looks like one should be base and one should be sub-base, is maybe what it should be, I don't know.
One should be crushed aggregate, which is usually rock, and then the other
Right.
should be aggregate sub-base, which would be sand and gravel. So it seems to be two descriptions of sand
No,
and gravel.
Well, it may be a little bit of wordsmithing in here, but I think
Yeah.
the first one is sub-base. 4-inch sieve for the sub-base, and then I think because it says aggregate sub-base. And then the next one, it's the second sentences, but it says the aggregate base. You have 2 courses of gravel.
So it doesn't, then there's nothing for the crushed aggregate and crusher run stuff.
Yeah, and I think that sieve I think this, it's been a while since these things have been touched, so like, again, they may be outdated.
Maybe just look at what
Yep, we'll go back
DOT
and-
has in their
Yeah.
descriptions, their definitions.
Oh,
for
yeah,
it.
I
Use
can
the same
easily grab
gradations.
that, we can take a look at that. I wasn't even thinking about that when I was looking at this.
Yeah, I
But,
just happened to notice it because it was,
yeah, I mean, like the
looking through all
type
those
B, the
rules.
type A, and the type D,
Yeah.
you know, we can go back and kind of mimic that sieve analysis for that. Because, I think actually we allow like the 6-inch minus for type D and the sub-base. But we'll clarify that.
okay, so any other, because this is really separate. I mean, it doesn't need to link to our loop. Okay, so I guess these changes we can go with.
Okay? We just have to, do we want to, when we think about that, do we want to do it in one public hearing, all of the ordinance changes? Or
Yes.
do we want to do them
No.
in piece, all at once?
All at once.
Okay, so this one we can kind of clean up and prepare for when we get to that point.
Right,
Okay?
good to go.
Yep. And then Article 13,
Article 13, any other,
Extra for every
I got the language that Bruce recommended.
Yeah.
That's not marked up to, that's just contract.
I don't know.
first, just kind of, from the board,
Maybe it's 10 grand by the time it's all back from what,
Hey, pay attention down there. So the Article 13, first, the overall kind of, without getting into any of the particulars, is everybody comfortable with going in this direction?
I got the text
Anybody-
changes that Bruce recommended,
With
which
the-
I'll make. Yeah.
Okay, so then in the more specific, then, I mean, is what's written up here okay to kind of move forward with? You'd like to see anything
Just
in
that
addition?
one comment on
Yep.
that.
One
We
comment?
got it.
Yeah,
I got it.
everything else
Okay.
looks good to me.
So besides Greg, everybody's happy?
Yeah.
Wow. Are you happy?
Okay.
All right.
I'm going Kyle.
All right. Well, Kyle's happy. Okay, so I guess in this one, then this, Jim, we can move
Okay.
ahead with as well.
So now moving on to other ordinances, after talking with Mr. Dvorak today. These are some that have popped up, and whether we want to grab a piece of them, discuss them in general, and then pick out some that we want to think about. I'm just going to quickly run through them, then I'll kind of come back and discuss. We have some issues with signs.
Yeah.
Food truck and vendors licensing, special events, emergency housing, temporary shelter, accessory apartments where consideration of exempt from lot density, recommendation from our attorney about penalty verbiage within the land use, about civil penalties. We just talked about connectivities, and I think to your point, the fire department, sprinkler requirements for large residents outside of subdivision. I talked a little bit about net residential, and then Greg's timber harvesting question. So going through, I think that the one thing that's come up with signs is, again, a recommendation from our attorney about some, I guess, landmark court cases where it's...
Superior Court case in 2015, that our sign verbiage, our sign ordinances should be more general,
Be more general.
instead of looking at signs in different categories. It should be a more generalized ordinance. We were looking at it through a whole different issue, and it popped up, and he read it. The town attorney said that there was a superior, he goes, we need to revisit that because the Superior Court found it, basically what it dealt with was a church sign. And because it was noted that church signs had a different ordinance than some other signs, that you couldn't do that. And he says there are some verbiage in our sign ordinance that kind of is like that as well, that he suggested that we rewrite it, not total rewrite, but just some more generalization in some of the signs.
Don't we have the design guidelines for signs?
You do, but this goes with placement of signs, where they can be put at.
Oh, okay.
And the content on them, and things
Yeah.
like that. So I think the attorney's got some recommendations or some
Yeah.
drafts that he could provide us, that we could look at that.
Okay.
As far as food truck vendors, they're becoming more popular. The issue we're having is the amount of licenses we have available and the very limited window that they have to apply for those. I don't know how and why we got into such a limitation on the application. I don't know if it's if there's anything really in there about the actual location of where they can set up, but I think it's more about the amount of licenses and the time frame that they can apply for.
Yep, what a lot of them are doing, towns now to also, just to have, where they want locations of trash cans, how often they are, that all the trash is removed by them. I've had two more inquiries about this over the summer.
Really?
And they missed the boat because you have to apply for it in April.
People aren't thinking about summer food trucks in April.
And like I said, it all depends on which way you guys as a board decide to go with that. It's still, right now, they have to be issued by the selectmen, which is fine, but maybe my thought would just be make it a little easier on the time frame, that they just don't have that one
Is
window.
this really a planning board function?
Well, it's an ordinance
It's
change.
an ordinance
It's an ordinance
change,
change,
so
so we have to promote it.
Yeah. So
We don't have any enforcement of it. It's between Scott and the Board of Selectmen,
Yeah.
but we have to kind of initiate the recommendation for the change.
Okay. Well, I think everyone's okay. I would We are, yeah, so let's go ahead and go.
Okay. Special events.
Whatever makes sense, Scott.
Special events, kind of, it's a broad stroke. Looking at people who host large parties, wedding venues, things like that. We really don't have an ordinance that covers that. We have a special amusement, which that doesn't really fall into that category. And this comes more into life safety issues, where if somebody's hosting, or whether it's commercially or even just residential, right, or
Yeah.
private, there's a certain size where we get into traffic issues, waste issues, noise, everything like that. And not that the board would have, again, any jurisdiction on reviewing that, but it would give Scott and the Board of Selectmen a little bit of teeth to issue some permits and then have the fire department to review that for all those different things.
Makes sense.
I think one of the catalysts we keep seeing in this and other communities is barn events, you know, and what point does the barn event become a commercial use? And what provisions does it need to provide for the event? From, you know, safety provisions and everything like that, and what impact does it have on a neighborhood if it's in a, you know.
So this would be a brand new ordinance.
Yes.
Yep.
Another ordinance,
I'm in favor of the Paper Reduction Act.
So Greg would like font 2 on that ordinance.
So you can fit it in one paragraph. And I don't know if it needs to be anything huge, but I think it's just, again, some kind of measure that the town can track. And we're not gonna try to, if you're having a birthday party, you have 30, 40 people at your house, we're not gonna track that, but it's for when you get into 100 or 150 people for a wedding or something of that nature, and you get into parking and those kind of things. It's the larger events we're trying to look out for.
So we're looking at more like the camp events.
Yeah, I mean, something like that, because most of the time, so they are notified, because if something, a large gathering like that, if something was to happen, they would, you know, at least they would know something's going to be going on that weekend.
And I think in some towns, you know, mass gathering ordinances, what I've noticed in some towns is they're talking hundreds and thousands of people under the mass gathering ordinances. I don't expect that to be the case, but I have seen some towns that anything over 100 is considered a mass gathering, so. That's why we just kind of said special events. It might be just more, you know, homey and a little bit more descriptive than just mass gathering, because I don't think people who are throwing a wedding venue think they're throwing a mass gathering.
Yeah, but, I mean, what special event could be?
Right,
You
but I
could
think we
do
would
it.
define what.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you
okay.
could, and you could, some towns even tier it, 50 under, 50 over, there's a different,
Okay.
all different scenarios.
Yeah, and then, you know, from the fire perspective with these gatherings, is just making sure that it's a safe event. An example, either the barn venue or like the tents that people set up for either that barn venue or other larger gatherings. They don't think about exits, maintaining aisle width, so that people can escape. And not all the time are these events held in good weather. A lot of times, you know, whether it's bad weather, they got like on a tent, they got curtains that come down. They're just not thinking about exits. And with a permit, we can kind of look at their layout or look at what they're doing and say, you need to do this, this, and this. And
Yeah, it'd probably go hand in
to
hand
make
with
it
maybe
safe.
special events for even like liquor licenses or things like that too. I don't know. Because I know when you run certain events, and you have liquor there, you need a temporary liquor license or
Right.
something like
Do you
that. So it
mean
might
if
go hand in
it's-
foot.
If it's free and for guests, or if it's being sold?
Yeah, well, to your point, but I mean, I'm thinking it would run hand in hand with that, but either that, I mean, it's just, you come into Scott to get a permit, basically, and it's more of a notification process for the fire department. Everybody know that this thing's going on. The other thing too is it might be able to, chance to put some limitations on noise and time of operation, so they
Yep.
don't go into the wee hours of the morning and disturb all
Are
your.
we having that problem now?
A little bit, not bad.
Oh, but it is cropping up.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay.
And like I said, one of my biggest things.
You don't hear it in your neighborhood?
Lakes are worse.
They are, I know.
I mean, some of the things, you know, certain things like some of the gatherings that they have at the school and something like that are exempt, you know, could be exempt from that. I mean, it's just something that you would kind of have to figure out what you would really like to gather in underneath that.
Okay.
Next one, emergency housing. Scott brought this one up. It's in the event of, tragic event where somebody's house burns and they bring in a temporary trailer or,
We had one that had a house burnt, he had to move out of his house, but it was on the Cape, which is in shoreland zone, but the temporary house is a mobile home, which isn't allowed. So if we can do something in our, what we came up with was a letter signed by the people who dropped off, the homeowner and the town manager. A permit had to be in 90 days after the house was dropped off. Construction had to continue, and then it's to be removed at a certain amount of time. It's just, if it happened once, it's gonna happen again.
Sure.
So I always, since we couldn't find anything, we came up with a letter, but if we had something in our ordinance that was something that we could just fall back
Okay.
on very easily.
accessory apartments exempt from lot density. Obviously, these accessory units are, formerly, I think they were considered in-law apartment type things, but we realized we couldn't really enforce who was living in there, but they're restricted by size of under 700 square feet. And the idea is that, I don't believe that in any of these cases we've used the lot density to determine 2 units versus, 1 unit when we did accessory units.
Right.
So the idea is just to put some language in there to say that, just to kind of, you get one exemption for a accessory unit.
Because the confusing part was you look at what a unit is and the definitions, and the accessory apartment really doesn't really call into it. It just is very generalized as to what it is. So if you really look at it, an accessory apartment is a dwelling unit, which means it would be subject to the standards, which could be double the lot.
So if you had 80,000 square feet for the single family, does that mean you need 80,000 additional for the accessory unit? No.
No, right.
That's not what our intention is, but if you read,
if you looked at it the way
you
it's
look for the
worded,
definitions, it could imply that.
Yeah.
We want to eliminate that.
I think we looked at that, we didn't even, when we changed that ordinance, I don't think we looked at,
I don't think we were even thinking about that.
no, nor were we thinking about the amount of land that gets cleared because of that.
Right.
And I'm wondering, when we visit this, if we want to have some sort of, it made sense at the time. If you have an apartment, what's the difference?
Well, I think we were
Right.
thinking in-law apartment, and then it went from in-law apartment to a general accessory apartment.
Right,
And we didn't think of the implications of land on the accessory apartment and how many of these things could pop up.
exactly.
To your point, maybe it's not the full lot density, maybe it's 20,000 for the accessory, additional 20,000 or something to that nature.
Right,
But it's something I think we do need to kind of look at and clarify.
I agree.
Because I could all of a sudden see everybody have an accessory apartment and make a
Right.
little extra revenue and.
Yes,
well, shoreland zoning already kind of cuts a lot of that out because they already, no matter what, they define it as a dwelling.
Yes.
So that automatically, anybody in
This is
shoreland
outside
has to have.
shoreline.
Yeah.
Penalty verbiage, again, from the attorneys, I think they're gonna provide us some language updating our civil penalties for violations and things in the shoreline, not the shoreline, the regular zones. Again, it's nothing that you necessarily get involved with, but it's an ordinance change.
okay.
Sprinklers for large residents, I think we're starting to see some extravagant large homes. And right now, the only time we apply the sprinkler standard is in the case of subdivisions.
Yep.
Where you can't get hydrants. So, maybe Wayne wants to talk to this one as well, but in some of these larger homes where we're talking 3,000 or 4,000 beyond, should we be requiring sprinklers? The fire department has to.
Yeah, on these larger dwellings, and we ran across one this past year, there was no way that we would be able to provide the fire flow to protect the building. And so it's just having a mechanism that's reasonable on these large residential dwellings, that there's no way that we can supply that fire flow to make sure that they're sprinklered.
What size home does that become problematic for you?
I'll have to
I
look.
know you're gonna say 1,000.
No. I'll look at the square footage
Yeah.
and cubic footage and
But we're
come up
talking
with
we're
a
not
number
talking,
for you.
we're talking very large residential structures here. We're not talking your average colonials or big colonials like that.
But Wayne, you said the amount of water flow, you're talking about putting out a fire.
Yep.
It was I thought it was explained to me that that the sprinkler system was designed basically to get people out, not to put the fire out.
And on these larger residential dwellings, there's different sprinkler systems that you can use. And on these larger ones, and this one that popped up this year, that really is driving this, that's not going to be the system that you've been seeing with the plans that have come before the board this year. It's still a residential system, but it has more flow capability. So yes, it's getting them out, but it's also protecting more of the building.
Okay.
It's not a huge fire flow demand for the to install that sprinkler. There's not a huge. It's basically what we're talking about is 2 heads right now. On the plans that you've seen, it's the fire flow for 2 sprinkler heads, and in this larger dwelling, it's 4 sprinkler heads. So that's the difference that we're talking about, really.
Those are just standard sprinkler heads you see in commercial buildings, is that what you're?
No, it's much less than a commercial building. You know, a commercial build, there's 3 different sprinkler standards. One is what you think of as in a commercial building or a school or a public building. Then there's this one that we're talking about, which is larger residential buildings. And then what we've been dealing with is the single-family home sprinkler. So there's 3 different sprinkler standards out there.
Is that like a 13R?
Yeah, 13R.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, this is just food for thought to bounce off the wall. I'm not against sprinkler systems. We've got the size question of where are we going to cut it off, where are we going to start it.
Right.
And then, I'm sure Greg would appreciate this, if the homeowner doesn't want to pay for a sprinkler system and wants to assume the risk, is there any way to offset that and protect the public from a fully involved fire if a homeowner doesn't want to pay for the sprinkler system, but he's over the threshold that we're suggesting that he consider it, should we require some type of mandated land clearance around his structure, 100 feet, 200 feet, whatever, depending upon the size of the structure? I know this is getting kind of esoteric, but it just, maybe that's another thing that's worthy of talking about.
It's not something that we would normally consider, but some
of that land clearing, if it's in shoreline, you won't be able to do it.
Right.
Right.
I think the other option that we've seen, not ideal, better than nothing, is the alarm system. The centralized alarm system is another, piece, but I think they prefer to have the source there to put the
Of course, anybody
put the fire out, or subdue the fire and get the people out of there.
Right.
An alarm system's not gonna necessarily, subdue the fire.
And right now, basically, there's some language, but it deals with commercial, that anything over 10,000 square feet requires a sprinkler system. So, it's not a big jump as far as going from residential to commercial with a house that size. Granted, there probably won't be as many people in there as there would be in a commercial area, but it isn't. I don't know what they're gonna look for as far as cutoff, as far as square footage.
Well, the sprinkler system is required for all subdivisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so this I think is going to be a big step into just the building, a lot that's being developed throughout, so.
Outside subdivision.
Outside
all
subdivision.
single families,
Right.
basically.
All single family, which is recently a majority of what's being built right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we haven't seen a subdivision in 5, 6 years, 7 years, right?
I don't think I've been here. I don't think
Yeah,
I've seen
the last
anything of
subdivision.
substance. It's been amendments to older subdivisions.
Yeah. So I think it's more than just kind of thinking about the size of the house. I think we're thinking of making a big jump as far as sprinkling systems go. which gets all into the affordable housing bit, you know, and I know we're only, right now, we're just talking about 10,000 square feet, but, you know, can you justify the difference between 10,000 and 8,000? You know, as far as having a sprinkler system, or 8,000 to 6, you know, I don't know where we could put that square footage cutoff reasonably.
And I think what they're trying, and I don't know exactly, but I mean, you face that with commercial buildings right now too.
Right.
What's the difference between 8,000 and 10,000? One has to have a sprinkler, one doesn't. There's just that you have thresholds that you trip.
And I'm not saying no to it, I'm just saying that I think it's a bigger step than just saying 10,000 square foot, single dwelling gets a sprinkler system. I mean, for the board, for us to consider, I think it's a relatively
I think the one
huge
thing
step.
too is, I don't know what the cost of the sprinkler system you're talking about. I mean, for a typical residential, you're talking $10,000 for typical.
Probably
is it
less now.
20,000 for?
It'll be very close to that.
Yeah.
But I mean, $20,000 when you're building a 10,000 square foot home.
No, I'm not, right.
You're talking about a very small amount of money
It would
in
be easy
relation.
to convince them to do that, they
Yeah.
perhaps just didn't think of it.
Right.
Yeah,
that
and I'm
it's
sure they
something
may
that
even
would
say
be-
that on insurance.
Or,
Yeah.
or, you know, or do you kind of lay out some steps in lieu of, if they don't want to do sprinklers, do we have some kind of backup fire pond or a tank?
Yep.
An alarm system, and, you know, I don't know, but
Right.
maybe we need to kind of give them an order.
I think an option, I think you're on the right track with that. I mean, if you're into that stage of building, you're in the 4, 5, 6,000 square foot house, you're gonna find that in the town of Raymond, generally on the water. You know, can
Where
we
you
talk?
can't get to the fire, you can't get to the.
Right, so
Right.
can we talk about an option where we could put in a dry hydrant pipe? Can we, what's it gonna cost for a cistern of whatever the calculation is that you need for flow for that structure, for a knockdown or whatever it may be? Maybe we keep it options open instead of saying, this is how we do it. Because that's what we do with the subdivision too. We say, hey, listen, you need a sprinkler, or in lieu of that, put in a fire pond or the cistern. So I think we should probably think about offering the same thing to those people.
Yeah, again, some of that too, you kind of creeping into where you're dealing with shoreline zoning on some of that, where fire pond may not be.
Right.
Well, fire pond may not be, but you could do a
Yeah.
cistern or a tank,
Yeah.
and that's primarily, most fire departments don't want fire ponds anymore because of the maintenance issue with them. So they prefer the cistern over the fire pond, because fire ponds open to everything falling into it and plugging up the screens, where a cistern's a closed, contained, known volume that's pretty much there.
Yep.
And understand that the particular case that actually started this thought process, we gave them some options, like the dry hydrant into the lake. They had some issues there because of, they couldn't meet the height. You know, we have a restriction of 20 feet from the height of the water to
Oh,
where we're drafting on
For the pump?
on a pipe. So they had that limitation. We looked at actually doing a fire pump. You know, that would basically be a fire hydrant on their own property.
Yep.
So it's
Then
not
you
that we
have to have
haven't.
a generator to run the fire pump if the power goes out.
Right. But we tried to look at other options with these large properties.
You would think that, to your point though, if
With
they
the
don't want to do the
sprinklers.
sprinkler, the cistern is probably the most convenient and non-impacting to their property.
Right.
You know, you put a cistern off the driveway or something, the fire department comes in, alarm's going off, grab it on the way in, and you got an immediate source. It's not ideal for what they want, but it's better than
Better than a
nothing.
fire alarm sounding off and, you know.
Yeah.
Wait, how many single-family dwelling fires do we have in Raymond in a year?
I'd have to get, it's not like we're going out every day, like,
But, I mean, 2 dozen, 3 dozen? Not that, 150?
you know, I don't have a good
Just no
answer for
guess?
you on that one.
That number will be low, I'm assuming.
I
Yeah,
would
it's a
assume
low
so too,
number.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the issue is that though, in some of these, where we see these larger developments on the lakes, they are really remote.
Yeah.
No, I was just,
Yeah.
that was an off-the-side
No,
question.
okay.
That was just
Yeah.
kinda like,
Just for the
I
general.
was just wondering.
Yeah.
Well, we can answer that for you if
No,
you're.
I was just curious. Thanks.
That might be interesting to know.
It's,
Maybe interesting.
it's probably less than a dozen.
Those that doesn't, okay.
Just a quick guess. Don't hold me to it. The chief will hit me when
Yeah.
when he comes
Especially
back
on
from
tape, you know.
vacation.
The final, I'll just kind of keep things
Yep,
moving here.
go.
We did net density. The final one is timber harvesting, raised by our own Greg Foster. The use, surprisingly, is not defined in our ordinance. It's defined in our ordinance, but the use, it never shows up in any of our zones as an allowed use. Which is strange because the definition's there. But the other interesting thing is that we really don't issue the permits either. That comes from the state. But I do think that where we define it, maybe we should have that use in the zones, with a caveat that the permitting is through the state and just a copy needs to be provided to the town or something to that effect. I think that's an easy fix, and to Greg's point, it does clear the air because it seems to be some growing in some other communities about the unclarity of that.
It is gonna require an ordinance change though, and are you okay with that, Greg?
Yeah,
So and that's all I've got now. I don't know if you folks have some questions or some ordinances that over the year you've noted that we've had some deficiencies or lack of clarity that you want to address, but this is the list that we've kind of got right now. I don't think any of them, other than maybe special events and maybe the sprinkler, are gonna be burdensome. I think the rest of them are just really mostly clerical updates.
Yep.
But with that said, if you have any, let us know.
So timeline?
Obviously, we'll get into the scheduling, but I don't think we're gonna have anything for December on
Right.
the docket. So I was thinking that going into the new year, the work will continue in January, February, and then by March, we really want to, March or April, we want to be having these wrapped up, public hearings completed and everything.
Yeah, I'd like to shoot for March,
Okay.
if we could, to get the public hearings, get it all done.
So like,
Then it-
so then what we do is we probably have another workshop in January, go over these new ones.
Yep.
Maybe we kind of have February as a fluff, have the public hearing in March.
That sounds good.
We did forget one more ordinance, the business licenses.
Okay.
Right now, the town, I was approached by town clerk and the assessor about business licenses. There's no teeth in there for permits for anybody who refuses to pay personal property taxes. All I can do is issue the business license through me, and then that's it. I don't have any teeth to that. Talk to the town attorney, what other towns have done, like Scarborough, is the business licenses go back to the select board they get to give them the okay, and that gives them a little more teeth that they would be able to revoke their license if they refuse to do X, X, and X. Because like I said, right now, what I'd like to see exempt from that would be the smaller, drawing a blank on that one, for working out of the house.
Oh, at home.
Home
Home
business.
occupation,
Home occupation.
to exempt them from that, because there really isn't any really need for them to go in front of the select
So
board.
would
for that.
would the attorney providing us
If,
language?
yes, he would provide us language.
Okay.
So
Sorry
add
about
that,
that, forgot
we'll
about
add that to the list. So to your point, Bob, I look at January as an opportunity to do another workshop. February workshop, I mean, we may lose winter conditions. Sometimes we lose so it gives us a little bit of a fluff factor if we have to come back to another workshop to
Yeah.
work out some details. But right now, March looks to be the public hearing that we do this on the agenda.
So that would have to go to the attorneys then sometime in
Between February and March.
February or March?
Yep.
Okay. So January meeting, we'll have a rough of all these.
Yep.
Okay, that
Yeah,
works.
because we got 2 months, you
Yeah,
know.
that'll work. Is that anything in here that nobody wants to address?
And if you
We'll talk
do,
about it.
you know, if you do over the next few weeks, just, you know, send them to Bob, send them to Scott, you know, we'll look them up and see if there's anything we can do. Most of these things end up being clerical, but some of them attorneys' drives too.
Yep. Okay. So we have one more item of business?
Yes, other business. Actually, we got 2 things. We have a Mylar you have to sign tonight for
Disc golf.
disc golf. And Dustin Roma came in here with a sketch plan, pre-application, which we could do it's the only thing that would be possibly on in December. They don't have any real urgency to get this rolling, but what they would like to do, and the reason that they even applied for this, is they'd like to do a site walk sooner rather than later because of winter conditions. I have copies of what they want to do. Pass those down. I think just scheduling that potential walk, and this is one that's right up our alley as far as road connectivity. We have a great opportunity here to build a public road to link to other public roads. So the dates that, because of the time of day and light we have now, I'm assuming we may want to do this on a Saturday. If not, then an afternoon, but obviously we don't have the availability of doing these prior to a planning board meeting anymore with docket 4:30 to 4 o'clock. So looking at the calendar, I was thinking that the 14th of December is not a bad date. Obviously the next two dates, you're right around Christmas and the holidays, and then January 4th is another date that could be used. This would be on the docket for January, whatever the meeting, 8th, I think. January 8th is the next meeting.
If we don't meet December, yeah.
If we don't meet.
Where's the Chipman's Farm stand along, it's right down in that area, isn't it?
No, it's,
Nope, farther down.
come off Viola.
You're up by Portland Glass, out behind Portland Glass.
We can feed you some instructions on how to get to this. And I would assume if we do it on a weekend, we probably, where it's in the holiday season, we'd want to do it in the morning to kind of get it out of the way. But I'm not speaking for all of you.
How does December 7th sound? It's a Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. Work for everybody? Jim, works for you?
It works for me.
Okay. 1000.
And this is just to give you some context, this is kind of it's a mineral extraction area, so it's going to be pretty easy to see what's going on in this one. It's pretty open.
Are you going to check with Dustin, make sure it works for him?
I will. Dustin, he preferred to do it early in December anyway, so I think this is going to be with him, but I'll let him know and then just have him do a layout of where his proposed road could be going so we have an idea.
Okay. And where will we meet?
We'll give you instructions, because we have to put a notice out anyway for that, so.
Okay.
We'll take care of that where we're gonna meet. I think we'll probably meet down by the entrance here across from Viola into the pit.
Okay.
But I'll ask Dustin where he prefers.
So I guess it's kind of, this is after the fact, but we're looking at this now because we don't normally accept these things the day of the meetings, only because it seemed to work that it would be able to skip the December meeting. This would have been our only piece of business, would be to schedule a sidewalk. So that's why we were going ahead with it, unless somebody, so we're kind of deviating from our normal routine here, which I don't like to do, but.
Well, you think about it, in the process of this, it does make some sense though, because at least you get to see the property before you start discussing it.
Yeah.
We're gonna confirm the time.
Yeah, we'll confirm, well, it's 10 o'clock.
It's 10 o'clock on the
10
7th.
o'clock?
We're going to confirm where to meet.
Yeah, we'll confirm with Dustin that it works, and if you don't hear from us, then we'll hold that date.
Okay.
But we'll give you instructions of where to meet, all that. And I do have larger plans if you do want a larger plan.
Yeah, actually, I would like a larger plan. You got it. Thank
You
you.
might as well have a copy of this cover letter for pre-app, because it'll be the same. If anybody, if you want to pass those down. Other than that, all we gotta do is sign the Mylar for Highwire, and I think if, to your point, Bob, if there's no other business, then we'll probably forego the December meeting.
Yeah, I don't see us needing it. I think we've got Does anybody just want, I think we're okay with the timeline of this. I don't think there'll be anything really ready for us to do as far as the ordinance stuff in December that we couldn't do in
I
January.
mean, yeah, we've got the two that we've kind of got already kind of shelved and ready to go. Obviously, we gotta fill in these other ones, so.
Right.
And we probably won't be ready by December anyway with some of these,
Yep.
given that we've got holidays already starting.
Yeah, and I think the worst case scenario is we could probably double up in February if we had to.
If we had to.
Yep. Does that sound okay with everybody? Okay with you guys down there? Kyle, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right.
How you doing?
So we just need a motion.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Yep.
Done. Passed.